The SUV skidded to a stop on the icy road. Through the white storm, Adrian Holt saw movement, small, frantic. A little girl tied to a tree, her face bruised, breath fogging in the air. A woman swung a broom, shouting words lost in the wind. The girl didn't cry. She only clutched a broken music box as snow gathered on her hair. Adrian stepped out, heart-pounding boots sinking into the frost. He ran. The woman screamed. The music box played a single trembling note. And in that frozen instant, Adrian didn't yet know his entire life was about to change forever. If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you, silently arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment saying Amen below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. Snow fell thick and soundless over the outskirts of Denver that afternoon. The kind of snow that muffles every noise, leaving the world breathless. The houses along the edge of Littleton were buried beneath layers of white, their chimneys sending up thin ribbons of smoke that twisted and disappeared into a sky of silver clouds. Out behind one of those houses, a little girl stood tied to a tree. Her name was Nora. She was 8 years old, small for her age, wearing a thin blue coat that had lost its buttons. Her skin was red from the cold. Her dark hair stuck to her cheeks, and in her trembling hands she clutched a broken music box. Each time she turned the tiny key, the melody of Silent Night played in a fragile, distorted rhythm, like a voice trying to remember how to sing. Her Aunt Claire stood a few feet away, a broom handle in her hand and a look of fury on her face. "You bring bad luck, you hear me?" she shouted over the wind. "We wash the evil out today." The wind didn't care. It swept through the trees, carrying flakes of snow that stung Nora's face like little pieces of glass. She tried not to cry. Her mother once told her, if you cry when it snows, the tears freeze before they reach the ground. Far down the quiet road, the hum of an engine broke the silence. A silver SUV came to a sudden stop by the fence, its tires skidding on the ice. A man stepped out. He was tall, wrapped in a grey winter coat, his breath fogging in the cold. His name was Adrian Holt. He had been driving back from the Resonance Works lab, lost in thoughts he couldn't silence, until he saw the small figure tied to the tree. He dropped his gloves into the snow and rushed toward her. "What are you doing?" Claire snapped, startled. Adrian ignored her. He knelt, untied the rough cord around the girl's wrists, and wrapped his scarf around her shoulders. "No child should freeze under the sun," he said softly. For the first time that day, Nora looked up. The sunlight broke through the clouds, hitting the snow so brightly that it hurt her eyes. But within that burning light, she thought she heard her mother's violin again, faint, trembling, alive. And so began the story of how one frozen afternoon changed two broken lives forever. The morning after the storm, Littleton woke under a sky pale as glass. The roads were quiet, the snow crusted hard enough to glint like powdered diamonds. Inside a narrow wooden house on Maple Street, Nora sat by the window with her music box in her lap. The tiny ballerina inside had lost one arm, and the tune of Silent Night skipped like an old memory that refused to fade away. Her new life in that house had begun 2 months earlier after the avalanche took her mother. Elise had been playing her violin at a winter fair in Breckenridge when the mountain shifted. The rescue teams found the violin cracked open, but never her body. For Nora, that instrument became a sacred thing, proof that music could outlast even death. Now, under her Aunt Claire's roof, music was forbidden. No noise in this house, Claire would say, slamming the cupboards shut. Noise brings nothing but trouble. But Nora didn't see music as noise. Her mother used to teach her to read sound the way others read light. Every note, Elise said, is a spark. When you listen, you don't just hear, you see. At night, Nora would press her ear to the wooden floorboards, pretending she could still catch the faint echo of her mother's violin in the dark. Sometimes when the wind moved through the cracks, the air hummed in a low, mournful tone. She'd close her eyes and imagine it was her mother saying, "I'm still here." Down the road, in a small brick house filled with humming machines, Adrian Holt couldn't sleep either. His home office was stacked with prototypes from his company, Resonance Works vibration gloves, light sensors, resonance amplifiers. His entire career revolved around one idea, that sound was more than hearing. It was something the body could feel. Once Adrian had been the golden boy of American piano. He'd performed at Carnegie Hall at 14, written symphonies before college. Then came the accident. A sudden slide of black ice on a winter road, the sound of shattering glass and the silence that followed. He lost the hearing in his left ear and his 6-year-old daughter, Emily. After that, he couldn't bear to touch the piano. He spent years building machines that turned sound into light and vibration, hoping somehow to give silence a new voice. When he'd seen Nora the day before, tied to that tree, something had stirred in him. Not pity recognition. That same fragile stillness in her eyes, that same way of listening to silence as if it were trying to tell her something. That morning, he stood by the kitchen window, coffee cooling in his hands, the scarf he'd wrapped around Nora still damp on the counter. That image of her tiny hands clutching the broken music box wouldn't leave his mind. He drove to the police station to report what he'd seen. But by the time he arrived, Claire had already been there. She told the officers that Nora was troubled, that she had fits, and ran outside screaming, and that Adrian had misunderstood what he saw. When the police came to her house, Nora stood by the door, silent. The red marks on her wrists had already faded beneath the sleeves of her coat. "She's fine," Claire said sweetly. "You see, she just needs quiet." The officers nodded, took a statement, and left. Adrian could do nothing but watch. That night, Nora sat again by her window. The world outside was dark, the snow glowing faintly under the streetlights. She turned the key of the music box, and the warped melody floated through the cold air. Her fingers were numb, but she didn't stop. Each note felt like a heartbeat she needed to keep alive. Across town, Adrian opened an old drawer in his studio and took out a photograph of Emily at 6. Her smile caught in the sunlight of another winter long ago. He set it beside the broken tuning fork on his desk and whispered almost to himself, "Some silences deserve to be broken." Meanwhile, in the wooden house, Claire poured herself another glass of wine, muttering about bills and bad luck. On the mantel, the broken violin of Elise gathered dust, its strings loose one side of the wood, scorched by candle wax. She didn't notice Nora watching from the corner, eyes fixed not on the woman, but on the faint shimmer of light bouncing off the violin's polished surface. And in that light, just for a second, Nora thought she saw something, a reflection of her mother's face, smiling in the glow. 2 days after the storm, the snow softened into slush. The sun hung low and tired over Littleton, turning every roof into a mirror of light. Nora stood outside her school, clutching her music box, wrapped in a wool glove. Her aunt hadn't shown up to take her home again. When the school doors closed, Nora sat on the bench by the parking lot. The street lamps flickered to life, early pale halos in the fading afternoon. She wound the key of her music box and waited for the notes to come, but the mechanism had jammed. For the first time since her mother's death, there was no sound at all. A familiar voice broke through the wind. "Seems your song's gone quiet," Nora turned. Adrian Holt stood a few feet away, holding a thermos, and wearing the same grey coat from that snowy day. His expression was gentle, uncertain, like someone afraid to scare off a bird. "You remember me?" he asked. She nodded, eyes fixed on the scarf he'd wrapped around her shoulders before. She still wore it every day, even when it smelled faintly of engine oil in the winter air. Adrian knelt beside her. "May I?" He held out his hand, and she hesitated before giving him the broken music box. He turned it slowly, listening. The gears were stiff, one tooth bent out of place. He took out a small screwdriver from his pocket, one of those habits engineers never lose, and adjusted the hinge. When he wound it again, the tune returned uneven but alive. Silent night whispered into the cold evening. Nora's eyes widened. "You fixed it," she said softly. He smiled, the kind of smile that felt like a memory returning. "Sometimes all it takes is one right turn." She watched the snow melt around his boots. "My mum used to fix things like that," she said. "She said music breaks when people stop listening." Adrian nodded. "Your mum sounds like someone who understood sound better than most people ever will." "She played the violin," Nora whispered. "She said I could hear colours." He paused, studying her small, serious face. "Can you?" She lifted her eyes toward the setting sun. "When the light moves through the snow, I see music. It's like it's trying to find her." For a moment, Adrian couldn't speak. He looked away toward the horizon where the light shimmered across the ice. "When I was your age," he said finally, "I used to think music was the only language God never stopped speaking." They sat in silence for a while, one man and one child bound by an invisible thread of memory and sound. Then Adrian said quietly, "Nora, I work with sound. I help people who can't hear to feel music again. If you ever need a place to listen, my door's open." "Do you still play the piano?" she asked suddenly. He hesitated. "Not anymore." "Why?" "Because I can't hear all of it," he said, "and half a song feels like a lie." Nora frowned. "Then maybe someone else can play the other half." Her words struck him harder than he expected. Something inside him shifted like a door creaking open in a room he'd sealed shut long ago. He handed her the music box, now playing steady and true. "Keep this one safe," he said. "It's not done singing yet." As she took it, the light from the street lamps reflected in her eyes, glinting gold against the white snow. Adrian rose, adjusted his scarf, and turned toward his car. Before he opened the door, he looked back once more. "Hey," he called. "Promise me something." "What? Don't let anyone make you afraid of music." Nora looked down at the box in her hands, then back at him. "I promise." It was a small promise spoken into a cold wind, but for Adrian, it carried the warmth of something long buried. For the first time in years, he didn't hear silence when he thought of winter. He heard possibility. As his car disappeared down the snowy road, Nora wound the music box again. The melody floated softly through the dusk, rising and falling like a heartbeat shared between two souls who had both lost too much to give up now. And though the world around her was still covered in frost, Nora felt something new stirring in the air, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. For a few weeks, life settled into something that almost felt safe. Every Saturday, Adrian picked Nora up from school under the pretense of tutoring her for a sound therapy project. He had cleared it with the school counsellor, who after meeting his gentle voice and careful eyes saw no reason to say no. At his small workshop near downtown Denver, the air always smelled faintly of solder and coffee. Shelves lined the walls, filled with tiny speakers, glass prisms, and tangled cords. Nora loved that place. She called it the house that hums. Adrian showed her how to place her fingers on the glass panels that vibrated with sound. You can feel the notes, he told her. Every tone has its own pulse like a heartbeat. When Nora closed her eyes, she could see the light move with the rhythm blue for soft piano gold for violin and silver for her mother's melody. She began to hum along shyly at first, then with growing confidence. Adrian watched, amazed. She had what musicians called synesthesia, the rare gift of seeing sound as colour. In that tiny lab among machines and memories, something fragile and beautiful began to grow between them. A kind of family neither had dared to imagine again. But shadows have a way of creeping in when the light grows too bright. One afternoon, Claire showed up at Adrian's office unannounced. She wore a white coat, her smile brittle as ice. "You've been spending a lot of time with my niece," she said sweetly. Adrian set down the soldering iron. "I've been helping her with a project. Nora's very talented." "Talented?" Claire laughed a sharp, cold sound. "She's a child with problems, Mr. Holt. My sister filled her head with nonsense, colours, sounds, talking to the light." She leaned closer, voice dripping with disdain. "She needs therapy, not toys." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You might want to show her some kindness. She's lost enough already." The next morning, he found 2 police officers waiting by his gate. Claire had filed a report claiming he'd taken Nora without permission and subjected her to experimental devices. They questioned him for hours. No charges were filed, but a warning was placed in his record. That same evening, child services arrived at Claire's house. Nora, confused and frightened, was told she'd have to stay temporarily at the Denver Human Services Center until the situation was clarified. Adrian came to see her, but they wouldn't let him in. Through the glass wall of the waiting room, Nora spotted him. She pressed her small hand against the window. Adrian did the same. No words were exchanged, but in that gesture lay everything neither could say. Claire, meanwhile, sat at home in her kitchen sipping wine and scrolling through her phone. On the table lay an old folder marked E. Moore, The Sun in Snow. Inside were handwritten notes, fragments of Elise's unfinished composition. At the bottom was a copyright signature Elise had never lived to file. Claire snapped a photo and sent it to a man named Elliot Braun, creative director of Braun Media. Still interested in the winter piece, she typed. He replied within minutes, "Send the full score. I'll wire the advance tonight." As the money landed in her account, she biled. Finally, she muttered, "Your light's good for something, Elise." But her greed made her careless. Hank Walters, the retired veteran next door, often kept his porch camera running for security. That night, it caught a dim reflection through Claire's kitchen window, the flicker of the violin burning in the fireplace, and Claire watching glass in hand. In another part of town, Adrian sat alone at his desk. The scarf Nora once wore was folded neatly beside him. He played back a recording of her laughter, something he'd captured during one of their lessons. The sound was faint but alive. He whispered to the empty room, "You've had enough silence. I won't let her drown in it." The next morning, he drove to the welfare centre again. Marianne Reed, the social worker assigned to Nora's case, met him at the front desk. She looked tired, sympathetic. "Mr. Holt, you need to be careful," she said. "Mrs. Claire Carter is saying some terrible things online." Adrian frowned. "What things? That you're using Nora to promote your company? That you built your sound therapy lab to exploit kids with trauma?" She sighed. "She's filed for full custody reinstatement, and she's gaining attention." Adrian rubbed his temple, the familiar ache behind his ear returning. "Do you believe her?" Marianne shook her head. "No. But until we have proof of abuse, the law's on her side." Adrian looked past her through the glass door, where Nora sat in the visitation room drawing quietly. On the paper, she had drawn a girl and a man standing under the sun. Around them snowflakes fell, not white but golden. Something inside him hardened into resolve. "Then I'll find the proof," he said. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of a broken melody, half silent night, half something new waiting for its ending. The first thaw of March came with a soft drizzle melting the ice into thin rivers that snaked down the streets of Littleton. The air smelled faintly of earth again wet alive and restless. Adrian drove for hours that morning, following the coordinates Marianne Reed had quietly slipped into his hand a few days earlier. "It's where they found Elise's violin," she'd whispered. "Maybe there's something there the reports missed." The road climbed toward the mountains west of Denver, where snow still lingered in the crevices like memories refusing to melt. When he reached the site, only a few shards of police tape fluttered among the pines. The world was silent, except for the drip of melting ice and the sigh of wind through trees. He parked, stepped out, and stood still. He had never met Elise Moore in life, yet her presence felt everywhere here, in the stillness, in the hush of air, in the half-heard tune that seemed to hum under the snow. He found the old trail marker bent under a fallen branch. A few steps ahead, half buried in frost, something glinted, a wooden fragment cracked but familiar. He brushed away the snow. It was the neck of a violin. When he lifted it, a small card slipped free, sealed in plastic, and stuck beneath the tailpiece. He peeled it open. Inside was a tiny memory card, no bigger than a fingernail. Adrian's breath caught. His hands trembled. He placed the card into his pocket and whispered, "Elise, if you're still speaking, I'm listening." Back in his lab that evening, he inserted the card into his computer. The screen flickered, then filled with static before settling into an image, a video file timestamped December 20th, 2022. Elise appeared on screen, her face half lit by the reflection of snow outside a cabin window. She looked tired, but peaceful, violin resting on her shoulder. Her voice was soft like the hush before dawn. "If the sun still shines on her," she said, smiling faintly, "she's not alone." Then came the melody, delicate, luminous, the same notes Nora had once hummed in his studio, "The sun in snow," but halfway through the recording, skipped the final bars unfinished. He played it again and again, each time noticing something new. The faint knock in the background, the whistle of wind, the echo of another voice, Claire's voice. "You'll never finish that song," she hissed faintly from another room. Adrian froze. There it was, proof she had been with Elise that night, just before the avalanche. He copied the file to a secure drive and sent a fragment to Marianne. "This could reopen the case," she replied, her voice shaking. "And if Claire forged Elise's signature, we can prove it." Over the next days, Adrian pieced together what he could. The metadata from the recording matched the registration on the music copyright documents Claire had filed weeks after Elise's death. Elise's digital signature had been copied and altered. Meanwhile, the online storm grew louder. Claire's posts spread like wildfire. Beware false healers preying on grief. Braun Media released a teaser ad using fragments of the sun in snow repackaged as a holiday jingle. Adrian watched the commercial play during the evening news. The melody twisted into something cheap and hollow. He turned off the TV and whispered, "Not her song, not like that." Marianne arranged a meeting with a pro bono attorney who specialized in child protection cases. They gathered the recording's bank transactions and Hank Walter's doorbell footage showing Claire dragging Nora through the snow weeks earlier. Still, the legal walls were high. Claire had power money and a public image of respectability. Adrian only had the truth and the courage of a man who had once lost everything. Late one night, unable to sleep, he went back to his studio. The broken tuning fork sat on the desk beside Elise's violin fragment. He tightened a new string across the wood and ran the bow across it. The sound that emerged was rough but pure, vibrating through the air like light breaking through fog. For a moment, he imagined Elise standing beside him, guiding his hand. The sun in snow belongs to her. Her voice echoed in his mind. He knew what he had to do. He opened a new project on his workstation, merging Elise's unfinished composition with the vibration patterns Nora had helped him map. The result was haunting notes that shimmered as both sound and light. When the last chord faded, Adrian sat back, eyes closed. He could almost feel the warmth of sunlight through the window. Somewhere deep inside, he sensed that Elise had just handed him the key, not just to the music, but to justice. The next morning, he sent the full audio file along with digital evidence to the district attorney's office. Then he called Marianne. "Tell Nora," he said quietly, "that her mother's song found its ending." And outside, as dawn spread over Denver, the snow glittered faintly gold, like the light of a promise about to be kept. The courthouse in Golden stood like an old cathedral against the spring light, its stone walls bright beneath a sky washed clean of winter. Inside, the air was tense and silent, filled with the faint murmur of reporters and the rustle of papers. Nora sat at the front, her feet not quite touching the floor, her small hands wrapped around the repaired music box. Adrian sat beside her, still and calm, though his heartbeat felt loud enough to echo through the room. Across the aisle, Claire adjusted her white dress and smiled for the cameras, sweet, saintly, rehearsed. The judge entered. Case of Carter versus Holt regarding allegations of misconduct and the custody of minor Nora Moore. Claire's attorney began with charm and lies. "My client, a responsible guardian, merely sought to protect her niece from the influence of a man who exploits grief for profit." Adrian said nothing. He simply watched the sunlight move slowly across the floor, inching toward Nora's chair. Then came Marianne's turn. She stood, her voice steady. "Your Honor, we present Exhibit B, a recovered video file from the late Elise Moore's violin, authenticated by timestamp." The room dimmed as the screen flickered to life. Elise appeared smiling, tired, radiant beneath a window of snow. Her voice filled the courtroom like a prayer. "If the sun still shines on her," she said, "she's not alone." Then came the music, the sun in snow. It started fragile trembling, then bloomed into a sound so pure that the room seemed to hold its breath. As the last note faded, a single beam of light broke through the high window, falling across Nora's face. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "That's my mum," she whispered. Claire's mask cracked. She tried to speak, but the words stumbled. The prosecutor stepped forward, presenting documents, the forged copyright, the payment records from Braun Media, the video of her dragging Nora through the snow. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. Then, in a voice smaller than anyone had ever heard from her, Claire said, "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted something of my own." The gavel came down. Guilty of child neglect and fraud. When the doors opened, the sunlight outside felt different, warmer, cleaner. Adrian walked beside Nora down the courthouse steps. For a long moment, they just stood there, faces turned toward the sky. "It's still snowing," Nora said softly, watching the last flakes drift down, melting before they touched the ground. "But brighter," Adrian replied, his voice breaking just a little. He handed her the music box, now fully repaired, the tune clear and steady. "Because you finally have the sun." 1 year later, the stage lights of the Lone Tree Arts Center glowed gold. Nora stood in a white dress before a small audience. Behind her, a banner read, "The Light Haven Foundation, Music for Healing Hearts." Adrian sat in the front row. Eyes closed, one hand resting on the armrest, the other tracing the rhythm in the air. The violin began soft at first, then rising, glowing. It was Elise's song, but now it carried something new. Forgiveness, rebirth, and light. When the final note lingered, a hush swept through the hall. Nora looked toward the empty seat beside Adrian, where sunlight spilled like a gentle touch. And in that light, for just a moment, it seemed as though her mother smiled back. Outside, the snow had melted into a thin silver mist. The air shimmered, and somewhere in that brightness, a melody drifted, part wind, part memory, part miracle. Because some songs never end. They just learn how to shine. Today's story comes to an end, but its echo still lingers in the heart. What do you think? Give us a score from 1 to 10, and feel free to share a few words in the comments. Every voice here is valued and heard. Before you go, let me ask you gently, are you doing okay today? If your heart feels heavy, let this place be a quiet corner where you can share and find comfort. See you again in the next bedtime story where love and hope remind us that no matter how dark the night may seem, kindness will always prevail.